Hi everyone, it's Joanne Fedler here, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about what happens when we are writing memoir. What happens when we are writing about other people? How do we protect ourselves and how do we protect them? Because of course when you're writing memoir or something that is biographical, what you're going to be generally talking about are the difficult things that have happened in your life, the stuff that maybe you don't want people to know about, and yet you do want to write about them. So if you have had an alcoholic father, or your parents got divorced, or you had parents who had affairs or were swingers or did illegal things, or you've done illegal things, or you've had ex-boyfriends who've done terrible things, or there have been difficult and painful secrets in your family which you want to explore in your writing, how do you manage that material in a way that you can stay true to the emotional experience that you're writing about, but at the same time protect the innocent people in your lives from your need to tell everything? I've actually often said that writing memoir and biography is like streaking in public, and while it's okay for us to expose ourselves, there are innocent bystanders who are scripted into our lives in a way that they haven't chosen. And so, for example, I write a lot about motherhood, and I'm writing about the experience of being a mother myself. But of course, that experience impacts on my children and it impacts on my husband because we're co-parenting. So how do we manage those tricky energies? And they are tricky, and I don't think there are any very easy answers. But this is how I approach the issue. First of all, I always set an intention when I'm writing something that my aim is never ever to write anything that could be hurtful to somebody else. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not intending to write anything that could potentially hurt another person. But of course, that's a very subjective thing, and something that I'm writing about, while I subjectively don't think is hurtful, might actually hurt somebody else. If I write, for example, that as a child I was very lonely and I didn't feel like my parents were very available to me, while that might be true, that might be very hurtful to my parents. So how do I manage that? Well, I always ask permission when I'm writing a story and I'm writing about somebody, particularly a person that the story is about. I will always ask permission from that person if I can use that story. And I'll always also say, can I change your name? And if they're not happy for me to have the relationship that we really do have, I can perhaps change the relationship a little bit. If it's a sister, I can make it a friend. If it's a friend, I can make it a sister. I can just sort of massage the facts so that that person's identity is protected and change their name. And if a person says to me, you know what, I'd rather you didn't use that story for whatever reason, I'm not going to use that story because I don't want to take other people's stories and use them in my writing if that person is not okay with it. So permission is a really, really important thing, and that is a very solid thing that I try to adhere to. Of course, at the beginning of our book, we can always say that all the facts that we're talking about might not be exactly as they've happened, and we can then have a little bit of license, narrative license, to move around within the story we've told to retain the emotional integrity of the story, but perhaps to change some of the facts so that we're not directly talking about people. We're talking about them perhaps indirectly, or we are suggesting things rather than other things. Of course, we could also always say we could fictionalize our story, and we could take the story that's happened to us and turn ourselves into a character and create lots of fictional roles around the story itself. So, or we could say this is a story based on true facts. Every time we write about something that implicates other people, it's important for us to think these issues through, to ask permission, to come from a good, solid place of integrity around these things, not to write about stuff and not ask people's permission, and to also be okay to let stuff go if we sometimes actually have to wait for people to die or not to be around for us to write about certain things. That is, of course, always sometimes the possibility that we might have to wait stuff out. And of course, as I've written a lot about my children, I have been very careful about the stuff that I've included. And I always think to myself as well that if my kids have to go into therapy later on in life because of some of the stuff I've written about myself, more than about them, but about my mothering, I don't think that's a terrible thing, because I think learning more about ourselves in therapy or in any other way is always very positive. So I hope that that's been a bit helpful to you, and I hope that it helps you to get your story onto the page.